Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you today. My name is Dustin Cormier. Welcome to How to Rock Astrology. Today's episode, we're going to be reading from Jeffrey Wolf Green's Pluto, the Evolutionary Journey of the Soul, talking in particular about Pluto in the third house, or the sign of Gemini. This reading is I always dip my toe a little bit in just to get a sense of what it is I'm about to digest. In this reading, Jeffrey Wolf makes a really interesting, kind of a psychedelic picture of this frustrating two-way dynamic that usually happens with Pluto in most mutable signs or houses. It's this disintegration thing that goes on with Gemini. The picture he paints is this desire on one hand to develop as Pluto would do in Gemini. It's a mutable sign. Pluto is a fixating, crystallizing influence trying to obsessively finally have absolution towards this, whatever sign it's in, whatever it's aspecting or affecting. In this case, it's Gemini, which is a mutable, movable, dynamic energy. And here, the person has this split between wanting to develop some way to constantly be getting new information and expanding your perspective, yet at the same time having to have a life, a person, an identity, a stability, a sense of self, which can hold on to that ecstatic vessel. So you've got the ecstatic ecstasy, the formlessness of Gemini, of the mutability of Gemini, mixed with Pluto trying to hold on to something. But how do you hold on to the principle of holdlessness, formlessness? So we're going to find that at this mental level, there's a combination of mental and emotional energy here, where the emotional energy of Pluto is trying to fix desperately upon something that's mental and transformative and is constantly changing, and the problems that are associated with that. Trying to find stability within the world of the cerebral acquisition of information, which is never fully stable. You don't want it to be stable. It's this funny thing that the stability comes from accepting that there is no stability. This typically happens with the mutable signs in Pluto. So, enough of my own little intro. Let's read what Jeffrey Wolf Green, from his own words, what he has to say about Pluto in the sign of Gemini, or the third house. Individuals with Pluto in the third house, or Gemini, have experienced the evolutionary necessity to project themselves into the physical environment, the senses, the third house, in order to collect information, facts, and data. Thus, this process has led to the evolutionary development and emphasis upon the mind and the intellect, in the mercurial sense. Now, this is Pluto in the third house is building upon the necessary continuance from what would naturally happen after Pluto having been in the second house. What I mean by that is that the third house is a continuation on the themes of Pluto in the second house. Now Pluto has progressed in the soul to the third house, or to the third sign, Gemini. In the second house, evolutionary necessity required withdrawal and internalization. If you watch the Pluto in the second house video, Pluto in the second house people have to internalize themselves in order to discover the sense of the individuality from within. It's to give it value. They have to let go of the external experience, let go of the senses, in order to give the person who is doing the sensing, the soul, the individual who's doing the sensing, to give it value, meaning, and an ability to identify one's own unique resources. to affect self-reliance and sustainment. And it's at a procreative survival level. That's all second house stuff. So by doing this, for a second Pluto in the second house person, emotional stability and security can be realized. Now, what does this mean? How does this theme progress as Pluto moves into the third house of the soul? For someone who's been incarnated into a soul where Pluto is in the third house. In the third house, the individual necessarily has had to move out from this center of subjective isolation, from the frog in the well. Again, if you'll read the book on, if you watch the video on Pluto in the second house, Jeffrey Wolf Green talks about this frog that's inside this well. And as the frog looks up, he sees a tiny little piece of the sky. And that is the frog's reality. And it'll never see past the whole sky, all that's available to the frog, because all they see is their own little world, their own little sad reality that they kind of impose upon themselves. And they hold on to that because it's like better to be a big fish in a small pond than to be a small fish in a big pond. It's more comfortable and familiar, less challenging. Now, in the third house, Pluto being in the third house now, it's launching that frog out of that well by force. It's just what it is. You've already done this with Pluto in your second house. Now your soul is incarnated, where Pluto is in the third, and you've been developing on the sense that there's an internal self that's there, that has a sense somewhere. Pluto being now in the third house is causing you in this process to externalize, to experience outside, to experience what that essential self is in your active experience, specifically with mental imagery and frameworks and the intellect. So, sorry. I'll get back to Jeffrey Wolf's quote. Jeffrey Wolf Green's words. Those with Pluto in the third house have had to project themselves into their immediate physical environment in order to make broader and larger connections to it, and thus also to themselves. I'm just going to turn my phone down here for a minute. These individuals have gained new experiences through which they have expanded their ideas and conceptions of who and what they are in relation to their physical environment. Lots of experiences of just going through crazy physical sensations and situations. The Pluto in the third house individual has been developing their mental powers and intellectual abilities in order to logically order their existential existence. In other words, they have needed to give names and classifications to the objects and forms of the physical environment in order to understand and to know it. By doing so, they have also defined themselves by understanding or attempting to understand their relationship within the schema of things, or as the Taoists would say, within the 10,000 things of this universe, as opposed to the one. In the broadest possible sense, the third house is the need for the human species to give names and classifications to what is otherwise a phenomenal world, not a world of mental conceptions. This is a finger, but it's also a biological organism, but it's also flesh and bone. It's all of these things, and it's more. The phenomenon that is this weird wiggling thing is so much more than we can ever give words to. So, the third house is the need for the human species to give names and classifications to what is otherwise a phenomenal world. By naming and classifying, We have made ourselves intellectually and therefore emotionally secure. Emotionally secure is a key Pluto word, and it's frightening thinking about how the only way for a Pluto in the third house consciousness to have emotional security is through the very liquidy, melting foundation of language and how we define things in reality, because that's always changing. In the deepest sense, the third house relates to our need to know the physical laws of our world in order to understand how it works. Not why it works, but how it works. Thus, individuals with the third house Pluto have desired to experience many kinds of circumstances and situations of their own making. Their natural intellectual curiosity has allowed them to build upon, from their own evolutionary point of view, the idea of who they thought they were and think they are now. There's been a desire and a need to understand their world in a larger and larger framework. There has been and will be a desire to accumulate a storehouse of facts and information about their world in order to build a logical framework or superstructure of ideas that rationally and empirically explain their relationship to the environment. And they, as an individual, are seeking to perfectly be what they need to be in their environment. But every time they go into a different part of the environment, they get new bits of data that changes what they thought their relationship to the environment was supposed to be. The desire in the past has not been to understand the deeper meaning of all these facts. The metaphysical or cosmological laws as contrasted with the physical, mechanical laws. The third house Pluto person has not been inclined to care about what it means. They care more about what it does and how it works. The focus has been and will be upon facts which are verifiable through the senses. This is Pluto in the third house, the researcher in a way, the person who really has to touch and sense the experiment and see it. Now, this all sounds like fun, like this person has lots of different data, all sorts of data. That's probably what you feel. Oh, sweet, this life is just all about collecting that data. The emotional security of individuals with a third house Pluto has been linked with their ability to logically order and thus know their environment and their relationship to that environment. By knowing their environment, these individuals come to know themselves, and that is true. But this dynamic of emotional security being linked to the ability to intellectually organize, it sets up a unique problem. This dynamic of emotional security being linked to the ability to intellectually organize reality. This sets up a unique problem. On one hand, the evolutionary desire and need has been to expand upon the intellectual framework. On the other hand, the desire for emotional security from Pluto has led to the desire and need to create a foundation upon which the expansion is built. A specific point of view where, now I see that there's a reality that I didn't understand, and now I understand it. And so there's the seeking, the desire for a specific point of view. I wonder if you can see the obvious problem here. The problem is that the desire to expand, to collect ever more information of facts, cyclically leads to a situation in which the new information directly undermines the existing foundation. being simultaneously attracted and repelled by the desire for new experiences or information. These individuals have necessarily made choices as to what information would be taken in and what would be repelled. And there's an ego involved in this, which is very complicated because the desire is to take in more information. Ultimately, that's the impulse here. But the self is trying to build a foundation upon which foundationness can be dissolved. From an evolutionary standpoint, Jeffrey Wolf continues, from an evolutionary standpoint, these choices have created intellectual limitations because of the need for intellectual and emotional security. Given the attraction-repulsion dynamic, these individuals will experience cyclic intellectual implosions or cataclysms in which the logical structure of intellectual organization disintegrates. Emotional security is affected, but they have learned how to adapt because of the inherent mutable nature of the third house. The symbol for mutability is an upward moving spiral. The intellectual and emotional implosion reorganizes, and the metamorphosis produces a new foundation, a more inclusive point of view. Spinning upwards eternally, whether the individual likes it or not. It just gets frustrating when you finally feel like you've got a place from which you can center a foundational root of how the information ought to be organized. And then, good, don't worry, there's more. Don't worry, you don't have it yet. Right? So this is this intellectual cataclysm that this person's bound to experience from time to time, which is especially frustrating because they might realize that their emotional security may be subconsciously sabotaging the very thing that they're living for. The intensity of the intellectual emotional implosion is directly proportionate to the degree to which the individual has taken in the information. If they have totally identified with the information or the idea, then the cataclysm will be total. The foundation seemingly completely removed, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. On the other hand, if the new idea is just being considered, identified with, or absorbed in a more minimal way, then the intensity of the implosion will be less. These cyclic implosions are always caused when, through evolutionary pressure, the intellectual framework has become limited or stagnated to the extent of preventing further growth or expansion. The intellectual framework has become limited or stagnated to the extent of preventing further growth or expansion. Then it's just bound to happen. Like the glass, it's almost like, you know how you boil, anytime you can something in a glass jar, you boil it, and then you put it back in regular temperature, and the cold sucks the lid onto it. But if you go from a super high heat to a super cold heat, the cold sucks in so fast that it'll actually crack the glass and shatter the very vessel that's supposed to be filtering this absorption of information. If the new idea is just being considered, then the implosion will be less. The degree of resistance relative to the need for expansion determines the degree of the cataclysm. So the more we resist the new information because we have an emotional security to the old information, the heavier the cataclysm is going to hit us, especially the more time that is spent in an old reality that you can't let go of because you're afraid that you won't be able to exist as well in the new reality, the more you hold on to that old foundation, the harder Pluto is going to come in when it finally does come in. To determine the degree of personal identification in any third house Pluto birth chart, check for other contributing or mitigating factors connected to Pluto. For example, Pluto in Leo in the third house, square to Mars in Scorpio in the sixth house, would lead to heavy and intense identification and therefore resistance to changing the intellectual organization and opinions. Resistance to changing the intellectual organization and opinions because Mars is tight-assed about it. Pluto in Leo in the third house, however, being trine its friend Mercury in Sagittarius in the seventh house, would not create the same intense degree of personal identification, but rather a receptivity to new ideas that's greatly strengthened by that Mercury. The evolutionary pressure of the third house Pluto to take in new information and to generate new experiences has created a rather intense degree of perpetual restlessness that resonates within the souls of these individuals. This restlessness, linked to boredom and stagnation, has led to the formation of an archive of experiences and information to which these individuals constantly refer to increase their understanding and to communicate this understanding or knowledge to others. In other words, restlessness compulsively drives these people onward for ever new information or experiences. Third house Pluto individuals have and will need relationships with others in order to process themselves. That is, to release the intellectual, emotional buildup of mental energy. In extreme cases, some of these people may become compulsive talkers. They need relationships not only to process themselves, but also to bring in new information from others. This continual interaction with others brings a constant need to adjust their ideas, which means that more and more facts are needed to explain in even greater detail the complete picture of themselves and the world in which they live. The problem is that these individuals feel that they will never know enough. Consequently, the data banks run the risk of becoming so large that they threaten to topple and disintegrate. Disintegration happens by having too many facts that logically connect in so many ways that there is no one composite or holistic way in which to relate all the data. Chasing one interest, idea, or desire after another, these individuals can end up walking down many different roads at the same time in a compulsive and unconscious effort to find that one fact, that one piece of information that will pull it all together for them. On this basis, these people can end up in a land of revolving perspectives with no center or foundation through which to create a consistent composite picture. Especially if you have no Saturn or no Sun strength in your chart. That would help if you had a strong Sun or strong Saturn with positive placements to it, these fixed nature planets would help to bring a fixity that you could find some kind of singularity of essence and purpose through. So there's always other factors to consider, but generally speaking, this is how Pluto in the third tends to operate. A land of revolving perspectives with no center or foundation to create a consistent composite picture. The individual's inner experience of their own center is one of revolving perspectives, of a revolving mass of emotions, and the feeling that the center or foundation is always moving, that there's no calm center or perspective, because they can always see every situation from different points in their lives where they could sympathize with it, yet from another point in their life they would not sympathize with it at all, because they've changed so much. Pluto, an immutable sign. Feeling lost and insecure, they can desperately reach out for one concrete fact to identify with and call their own. And yet, from an evolutionary point of view, the inner center of these individuals must move. The center or foundation is the movement itself. This spiraling effect can be endless as the perpetual cycles of contraction and expansion occur. The evolutionary basis for the constant movement of the center is to eliminate intellectual limitations that periodically form in the attempt to stabilize and feel secure. This is from Pluto being an immutable house or sign. It just has to be melty. That is the fixed center of it. And any time that you put a form or an identity that this is the final piece of it, you're going to get sucked out from under your feet. In addition, these cycles of contraction and expansion occur to progressively lead the individual into the awareness that there is an intrinsic limitation to what the empirically oriented mind can know in and of itself without the inclusion of the intuition. This brings us to Pluto's polarity point in the home of the intuition, the superconscious mind, which is Sagittarius in the 9th house. With Pluto's polarity point in the 9th house, or Sagittarius, which is always the opposite, the yin to the yang of Pluto's natal house, right? The natal house is the 3rd, opposite to the 3rd is the 9th. And there's the 9th, any Pluto in the 3rd person has a relationship to the 9th that is too extreme when it's there and too not extreme when it's not there, if that makes sense. Meaning that the opposite to the nature of Pluto in the 3rd, that being Pluto in the 9th, there are parts of the 9th house that you need to integrate, which is intuition, philosophy, guidance from within. But if you only use your intuition, only use your guidance from within, only just guess things without checking the facts yourself, then you'll be losing the 3rd house pole. So how do you integrate the two? How do you integrate an aversion to faith, but a need to use faith, 9th house, with the need and the desire to check every fact and check the facts of the facts and check the fact checker fact-checking the fact check? All of that. How do you balance those two? This is part of what this person's reality is. With Pluto's polarity point in the 9th house, or Sagittarius, the evolutionary intent for this life is to develop the intuitive faculty as opposed to an intellect that is primarily concerned with empirical, objective facts. By developing the intuition, these individuals will progressively understand the deeper meaning or significance of the facts, the metaphysical or cosmological laws that are the basis of the physical laws themselves. What's the mysterious cord of truth from which material reality bases its nature's laws on. They will learn how to synthesize all of the data into a composite or holistic understanding of how all the parts are related to the whole. Intuition is the faculty in all of us that becomes aware or is aware of knowledge that is not a product of deductive thinking. Intuition is that part in all of us that knows what it knows without knowing how it knows. The necessary development of intuition for third house Pluto people demands that they learn how to quiet their constantly busy minds. By doing this, these individuals can open up and tune in to the intuitive faculty which is naturally plugged into the truth that exists in our universe. A primary way in which these individuals can harness and quiet their minds is to align themselves with one comprehensive philosophical or metaphysical system that makes the most sense to them on a gut level. By doing so, these individuals can intuitively align themselves with one holistic principle upon which all of the pieces of information floating around in their heads can be given a bottom line. By creating a bottom line, all the facts can be synthesized in order to reflect the truth of the particular philosophy they have identified with at that time. By aligning themselves with a comprehensive philosophy that is personally identified with on a gut level, these individuals can create a consistent interpretation of the facts and the world around them. A quieting and a harnessing of the mind will be the result. Relative to the past evolutionary and karmic conditions, some individuals will create their own bottom line philosophical or metaphysical principles upon which they base the arguments and rightness of their opinions and facts. They'll just make up their own. These types will not align themselves with a philosophical system outside themselves. Others, with Pluto in the third house, or Gemini, will align themselves with 2 or 3 or more systems outside themselves. In so doing, they will select the principles in each that agree with some pre-existing point of view that they refuse to give up. So much for their variety. In this way, they will synthesize these systems into their own brand of philosophy and truth. Others will make a total commitment to one philosophical system outside of themselves that they will feel most drawn to in order to create a necessary bottom line. The voice of personal authority with respect to these opinions will thus be linked to the authority of the system itself. In all these cases, the evolutionary need and pressure to seek out the bottom line cosmological or metaphysical principles upon which all the facts are based, that desire to find the one thread of truth and reality, this will permeate all of these types of people. Because Pluto in the third manifests in all these different ways that we've just stated. But they will all have an evolutionary need and pressure to seek out the bottom line, cosmological or metaphysical principle upon which all the facts are based. This evolutionary pressure is teaching all of these people the connection between the physical and metaphysical, between the mind and intuition, and the limitations implied in the empirically oriented intellect. So, through the polarity point of the ninth house, Sagittarius, the individual must intuitively learn to realize the truth that explains the basis of what can be empirically observed. In other words, the archetype of the ninth house correlates to the laws that are the very basis of creation, the very basis of why human beings have developed religions, beliefs, and philosophies. Just as belief systems can be limited or sectarian in nature, i.e., one version being more right than another version, so too do the third house Pluto individuals run the risk of limiting themselves to a version of metaphysical truth by responding or reacting to the evolutionary requirements in the ways mentioned above that we just said. On the one hand, it's necessary to understand intuitively the bottom line metaphysical principles upon which all the facts, on all the millions of facts of the 10,000 forms are based. On the other hand, to consider that those principles are the only ones that are relevant and right will promote a sectarian attitude, a sectioning attitude. The narrow viewpoint is linked to the need for emotional security of an intellectual nature, and often implies a need to convince or convert others to one's point of view, to one's own point of view. This implied limitation will thus guarantee, from an evolutionary point of view, that internal and external confrontation will occur and will continue to occur until the individual realizes that his or her version of the truth is just that, a version. It may be a necessary and relevant version given the individual's evolutionary and karmic background and requirements. The version is not the question in and of itself. Considering the version to be the only valid system is the problem, especially when it's so instinctive that you start blinding yourself to other things, other facts, other realities. The reality. Once the individual is forced to make this realization, or they intuit it, then two things will happen. A, the individual will not need to defend personal opinions and philosophies to anyone, nor deny another's. Thus, the resulting metamorphosis will allow the individual to participate in conversations of all kinds in a non-defensive way, and to learn how to learn from others, as well as others learning from him or her. Option B is to continue the evolutionary journey in the discovery of the whole truth. This journey will ultimately lead the individual into the awareness, intuitively realized, that the truth exists in and of itself. It always has, and it always will. In this realization, the individual will understand that the empirical, fact-seeking mind and intellect are there to communicate and explain the truth. In other words, that the intuition applies to intellect, and the intellect does not know what is true in and of itself. In addition, the ninth house polarity point will be teaching all these individuals the differences between reactions and responses. Prior to the necessary metamorphosis, these individuals will be more or less a reactive type. In conversation, for example, They may not really listen to another, or they may wait for an idea or thought to react off. By not really listening, these individuals are concerned with impressing themselves on other people with their own ideas and knowledge. By waiting for a thought or idea to react to, these individuals are waiting to use another's thought or idea as a launching pad to assert their own point of view. Of course, this dynamic can lead to conversations that go nowhere, or end up in inverted spirals of clashing perspectives. It can lead into arguments or intellectual confrontations in which all parties concerned try to convince or convert each other to their own points of view, without seriously considering or listening to anyone else. In other situations, this reactive process can lead these individuals into simply walking away from a conversation, wondering if he or she could have said something else, or said it in a better or different way. Or the individual could simply shut the person off and just walk away from a conversation. These are probably common experiences for Pluto in the third house people. In all cases, the intent and effect is the same: to stimulate awareness of their intellectual intellectual traps, games, limitations, motives, and the needs and dynamics that have created them, seeking to unfold that unto themselves. As this evolutionary drama unfolds, these individuals can learn the lesson of response versus reaction. A response is considered action that translates, in this case, to knowing when to talk and when not to, what to say versus rambling or trying to prove a point, and listening to other people's ideas and knowing what to take in and what to reject. Rather than buying a load of books that are not read or are partially read, these people will learn to buy one book at a time within a certain subject area that they feel intuitively drawn to. Progressively, from an evolutionary point of view, these people will come to realize the difference between opinions and that which is true. The four natural evolutionary conditions determine the kinds of ideas and philosophies that these individuals gravitate toward. You can see more about the four natural evolutionary conditions at the start of this Pluto Evolutionary Journey of the Soul series, the introduction of the book. It's four different people are at different evolutionary stages of the game with regards to Pluto's placement anywhere. So those who are in the herd state, who are kind of letting the world push them around and have not evolved into an individuated consciousness, those in the herd state will listen to consensus opinions and ideas about any subject, and they would consider this point of view to be their own, what everybody else thinks, whatever everybody seems to think. They would gravitate to the accepted forms of religious or philosophical expression. Those in the individuated state, it's the step above where they take themselves, they take the onus upon themselves to be their own evolutionary vessel, or that's not even the way to say it. Like the spiritual person considers their soul to be an evolutionary vessel for evolution's sake. And they consider evolution, they understand intuitively that they're a part of that. Now, that's a higher stage. The stage after the herd state is the individuated ego state, where I have to do it all because it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, and I'm going to be on top of those moron sheep, not realizing that there's a higher evolutionary state on top of that. But this is the state we're talking about, the ego state, the individuated state. So, this is someone who's evolved from the herd state. Those in the individuated state would desire to think for themselves, not just letting what everybody else thinks be their point of view. They desire to think for themselves, for better or worse. They would reject consensus opinion and would explore for themselves the subjects that attract them. They would tend to reject unquestioning attachment or bonding to any pre-existing formal philosophy, religion, or cosmological system. They would create their own system, their own religion or cosmological concept. Or they would synthesize concepts from many different systems into a composite whole. Some individuals in this evolutionary state will select one pre-existing formal system that they feel intuitively drawn to. This is a sign that these people are moving rapidly toward the spiritual evolutionary state, because they are beginning to realize the evolutionary and karmic limitations in creating and relying upon a metaphysical system of their own making. In other words, truth is to be realized, not created from an egocentric point of view. Realized, because truth already is. By aligning themselves with a system outside themselves that reflects what they intuit to be true, these individuals are admitting that there are forces or powers larger than themselves. Individuals in the spiritual state itself. Now, this is coming from the next state, past the individuated ego sense, where the person begins to sense that they are a vessel for larger evolutionary forces happening through them. And, within and without them. Individuals in the spiritual state itself would attempt to understand the timeless basis for the physical laws of our world, and would use facts to illustrate a spiritual point or principle. Would use facts to illustrate a spiritual point or principle, accepting the duality of material and spirit as one. These individuals will align themselves with specific cosmological, metaphysical, religious, and philosophical systems that they feel most drawn to intuitively. These systems will be based on the intrinsic metaphysical truths and laws that are the basis of creation itself. These intrinsic truths and laws are commonly communicated by these people, and the system itself, through metaphor, analogy, parables, and inference, wherein an empirical, observable fact is used to illustrate the principal truth or law. So yeah, that's how these intrinsic truths are expressed, is through obvious examples in the world. Parables, analogies, because it's a real-world example of something that is universal and timeless. Even within this evolutionary state, even in this spiritualized state, limitation can exist when either the specific system or the individual denies another system as wrong. Evolution occurs in this spiritualized state by progressively teaching the individual the whole truth and the essential unity of all paths leading to the realization of the one truth, of the truth. The whole truth, not necessarily the one truth. It actually doesn't say the one truth. I'll read what he actually wrote. Evolution occurs in this spiritualized state of a Pluto in the third house person by progressively teaching the individual the whole truth and the essential unity of all paths leading to the realization of the truth. Once the necessary evolutionary lessons are developed, the third house Pluto individual will have natural communicative skills that can inspire, motivate, enthrall, hypnotize, and metamorphose other people's intellectual patterns and opinions by sheer contact with them. Their ability to understand the connection between the macrocosm and the microcosm, between truth and a fact, is unsurpassed. That's sweet. I totally get what this is saying. It's very cool. This ability can translate into taking any number of facts of a diverse nature and relating them to one central principle from which the facts emanate. The penetrating intellect can identify the essence of any question, problem, or issue that is posed by or to the individual. Once the core of any problem, question, or issue is exposed, the solution can soon follow. And these people are experts at the consciousness that is the solution of any cerebral problem. And the ego, the willingness to open to the highest truth. These people develop the ability to deal with what that is and what that means in profound ways. Especially when this Pluto placement is well defined, if the planet that rules the third house is healthy, if Mercury is healthy. This is the kind of thing that gives these people a ready capacity to deal with the world of knowledge, language, conception, and how to deal with it in ways that don't block the expansion of truth and intellect in any moment. So that was basically the gist of this Pluto in the third house Gemini reading. Now, just got a few more common characteristics described by Jeffrey Wolf here, and then we'll show some charts of famous people who have, according to Jeffrey Wolf Green, who had Pluto either in the third house or in Gemini. Common characteristics of the third house Pluto individual include deep, penetrating mind, intelligent, curious as long as they can control the direction of the curiosity, the ability to recognize the weakest possible link so the ability to recognize the weakest possible link in any argument, an ability to uncover the facts, an ability to appear very logical, yet intellectually or emotionally defensive. They have a capacity to do that. So sorry, let me read this again. Pluto in the third house people are capable of appearing very logical and yet intellectually and emotionally defensive when other people's ideas threaten their own intellectual order. For Pluto in the third house people, there's said to be a natural power emanating from the hands, which is ruled by the third house, Gemini, fingers. For those involved in healing, Pluto in the third house and Pluto and Gemini people make excellent massage therapists because the electrical nervous system in the hands is highly charged and magnetic. Such individuals can resonate with the electrical field of another in such a way as to trigger their own neurological impulses that tell them what the client needs, especially neuropathy and what a person's body needs, but also in the mind as well. Because the mind and body are connected. And this Pluto in the third house person can have a certain intuitive understanding of how this client's body and mind connect, and how my mind has created this body, and how this body has attracted this mind. And the problems with those two. Some famous people with Pluto in the 3rd house, or Gemini, include Benjamin Disraeli, William Butler Yeats, that's an interesting one, Queen Mary of England, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Robert F. Kennedy. And I'm just going to show you guys the charts, Jeffrey Wolf Green's personal rendition of these few charts that have been given here. It's Benjamin Disraeli. Feel free to pause it if you feel like just checking it out and pondering. This is William Butler Yeats of Aleister Crowley Golden Dawn fame. Let's see, what am I writing here? Here we go. This is hard to do. There's William Butler Yeats. Here is Queen Mary III of England. Here's Napoleon Bonaparte. And here is Robert F. Kennedy. That was Pluto in the 3rd house and in the sign of Gemini. I hope you guys enjoyed that. It's like getting to be midnight where I am, so I think I'm going to pooch it for today. I hope to see you guys again on more of these videos. If you guys enjoyed, check me out. Check out my website, dustincormier.net. Subscribe to me, and let me know what you thought in the comments, because I've always got more stuff coming out, and I've got more of these videos coming out as well. Plus, if you dug this whole Pluto thing, I've got another video talking about Pluto in the 3rd house from other authors. So if you look up Pluto in the 3rd, How to Rock Astrology, you'll be able to find my other video. Thanks for watching, folks. I'm Dustin Cormier, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Thanks so much for watching.